Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to welcome you at the webinar entitled Automotive Skills Shift, Employment, Education and Training. Are we doing it right? Organized by the National Center for Climate Change. The technical shift from combustion mobility to greener emission-free transportation is a fact. The European Commission has announced a new Green Deal and the Fit for 55 package, stating that all manufactured cars should be emission-free from 2035. We are already late as a Europe, and soon a shortage of skilled workers in the elektromobility sector will become evident. The time is to act now. Our business models and value chains must be rebuilt with low and zero emission goals in mind. The employers prepared to engage in learning and training those new skills? What support they expect from the authorities on the local, national, and European levels? How to use existing competences to update them with the new green ones? Those are the key questions for the future of e-mobility development. During this event, we are discuss these issues and search for the answers with the support of experts and practitioners. Now, let me present the brief scenario of our meeting and to welcome our guests. We'll divide today's webinar into two parts. The first, we start from the opening presentation, e-mobility, a green boost for European automotive jobs. This is Boston Consulting Group report powered by Platform of Electromobility. And this presentation will be presented by Dr. Christian Kuhlmann, Managing Director and Partner of Boston Consulting Group. Good morning, Christian.
Good morning.
Then we will see the Polish perspective in the presentation. How will e-mobility change the Polish labor market? Presented by Aleksander Reich, Development Director and member of the board of Polish Alternative Fuels Association. Good morning, Aleksander.
Good morning.
And the second part will be moderated panel discussion. And let me welcome our panelists. Arne Richter is the chair of the Platform of Electromobility. Good morning, Arne.
Good morning, everyone.
Paweł Wideł, president of the Union of Employers of Automotive and Industrial Articles in Poland. Good morning. And
Good morning.
Wojciech Stękły, chief expert of the Integrated Qualification System, the Institute of the Educational Research. Good morning, Wojtek. So let's move to our first point. Christian, the floor is yours, and let's start the presentation and let us know the findings of your researches and let us see your report. The floor is yours.
Yes, very good morning to everybody. And first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this panel and for inviting me to the webinar and talking about a study that we did jointly with the Platform for Electromobility under the leadership of Arne Richter. And we had one very simple question, as it seems, to answer, which is, when you look into the details of it, not so easy to answer. So what is, or how will the number of jobs in the automotive industry change until 2030? And when you want to answer that question, the first thing you need to think about, what is really the automotive industry when you look in 10 years from now? And from our perspective, the automotive industry in 10 years from now consists, on the one hand side, of the, let's say, core automotive players. These are the OEMs, these are the ICE-focused suppliers, these are the ICE-unfocused suppliers, and this is the maintenance and repair industry. But in addition, there are adjacent industries, as for example, equipment and services, energy production, energy infrastructure, and recycling, that are all going to be impacted somehow by the trends that influence employment in the automotive industry. So we tried to come up with a really holistic view on the one hand side on the in terms of really the industry itself. In total, this industry, as of today, employs 5.65 million employees. You see that we took numbers from 2019. We did that on purpose to eliminate any kind of short-term COVID effects, but to have a real comparison of a status quo 2019 to what happens to the industry in 2030. On the other hand, it's not only about the industry itself, it's about the trends as well. What trends do really have an impact on the automotive industry in the next 10 years? And for sure, electromobility, the shift to electromobility is one of them. But all in all, there are 5 trends where we believe that have a huge impact at the end on the employment in that industry. Number 1 is the market volume. So how many cars do we have in 2030? And this is a question in terms of sales. And you see that we have a slight decrease in terms of sales until 2030 compared to 2019. It's a question of production. So how many cars do we produce in Europe? And you see here as well that this is a slight decrease. And the third volume we need to take a look at, for example, when you think about the maintenance and repair industry, is the car park. So how many cars are really on the street in 2030? And there you see that this is going to be a slight increase until 2030. The second big trend that has an impact on employment is the technology evolution. And here, for example, I think about autonomous driving, a trend that is going to impact the industry heavily. And as of now, it has a positive impact on employment because you can read it in the press that especially the OEMs and the tier 1 suppliers employ a lot of software engineers to bring in the necessary software into the car that is, for example, relevant to have autonomous cars on the street within the next decade. A third trend with a big impact on employment is the product mix. You can see on the street that we have an increase in content per car year over year. The cars become more and more valuable with every year we look at them. One thing that probably most of you have seen or noticed on the streets, we have much more SUVs on the streets than we had a couple of years ago, and they have more content in them, and this content needs to be produced somehow from the OEMs, but mostly from the tiers, and this brings jobs. The second trend within this product mix is the question of how does the car portfolio develop. And we have around 600 different car types on the street that the OEMs produce as of now. And this will remain more or less flat in the next 10 years. That is a difference compared to the last 10 years, where the OEMs increased the car portfolio drastically. Another trend that is hugely impacting the employment is the question of how much more productivity will we gain in this industry. And this is a trend that we foresee is more or less stable. When you compare it from the last decade to the next decade, you see that we will have an average increase in productivity of around 0.8%. All digital technologies, just speaking about Industry 4.0 for a second, are trends that will make employees in direct processes and in the indirect processes more productive, and this has a negative impact for sure on the employment. And then the last trend, for sure very important, is the question of what is happening to electromobility. And we all know that an e-motor compared to a combustion engine has less work content in it. And the share of electromobility will rise drastically, especially when you look into the last 3 to 4 months. Each OEM increased or made announcements to increase the speed of shifting to electromobility. So this has a negative trend on employment. Whereas on the other side, for example, battery manufacturing will come into place, and we see that in Europe in the next decade we will see about 25 battery factories that will rise, that brings jobs that we have not as of today. So you see here again, as you saw already on the slide before with the industry, that we really want to have a holistic view, not only looking at one trend, but really looking at the sum of all trends that have an impact on employment. And when you now take this entire industry and apply all those trends to that industry, you will see that the sum of trends will keep employment stable. And I think that is let's say a good news as of today. You see that we have 5.6 million jobs in the industry today, and you see we will have around 5.6 million jobs in the industry in 10 years from now. So all in all, employment will remain flat. But when you look into the middle of this chart, into all the red and green bars, you see that a lot of things are happening. And you see that those first 4 bars are bars that we know from the past as well. We know that market volume, technology evolution, and product mix have a more or less positive impact on the industry that happened in the last 10 years. And productivity gains usually eat that up, at least partially. And then you see those 2 big bars on the right-hand side. You see that the shift to EV will change the employment massively with a more or less flat development overall. So one very important message from my point of view is that the sum of trends keeps employment stable. Yet, when we look one level deeper and when we look really on industry level, we see that really a lot of things are going to happen to each of those industries. So we see that OEMs and ICE-focused suppliers will be massively impacted in the next 10 years from a negative perspective. And you might have heard in the last couple of days that Volkswagen is currently exactly talking about that topic for their plant in Wolfsburg and the other plants alike. We see that the non-ICE suppliers, so those that, for example, will produce batteries in the future, will gain massively jobs. If you look into the battery industry alone, we will see more than 60,000 jobs coming in the next decade. And then you see that the maintenance and repair industry will have a slightly positive impact in the next 10 years. You see as well that in those adjacent industries that I introduced earlier in my presentation, we will see positive impacts from the trends. And here, especially the trend of electromobility will have a positive impact. We see that energy production will need to employ more people just for bringing for producing the energy that is necessary to fuel all the battery electric vehicles in 10 years from now. And we see that the energy infrastructure needs to be set up in the next 10 years to fuel all those cars. So, for example, we see around 100,000 jobs coming in the charging infrastructure to build all those charging points that we need in Europe, around 5 to 7 million public charging points and around 40 million private charging points, just to give you a little bit of feeling of how much that is going to be. So on the one hand side, overall employment stays stable, but there are going to be significant shifts in between those different industries here. Some will be impacted positively, others will be impacted rather negatively. And so the big question is, how do we make this transition of job positions possible in the next decade to come out in a positive way as a European Union? And there we need to take a look into this transition. We need to take a look in 3 different perspectives. One is going to be a transition over time. So this employment needs to change continuously. It's not from one day to the other, but it's really a timeline of 10 years where you have changes every day. The second shift we need to take a look at is the transition between industries and job families. As you saw on the slide before, there are some industries impacted negatively, others impacted positively, but it's not going to be that easy for someone who works for an OEM right now to work for the charging infrastructure in the future. So this transition needs to be actively managed. Trainings need to be put in place to be able to shift those employees that are maybe, for example, right now 40 years in age and will need to work in 10 years from now still, but in a completely different job profile. And the third transition we need to take a close look at is the transition across regions. So those jobs are not going to be in the same region as they are right now. We took a deeper look into this in Germany, and we see that jobs that are currently maybe more in the south of Germany will be in the future a little bit more in the east of Germany. And we need to manage this actively so that people that work right now in southern Germany are able to work in other parts of Germany in the future. And this does not only hold true for Germany, it holds true for every country, and it holds true for the European Union as a whole. Let me deep dive into one of those transitions and explain or give you some numbers on what's going to happen. And for me, one of the core transitions is the transition of people in between industries and job families, because that is only possible when we do or when we provide the right training opportunities. And here we show what kind of training or what kind of shift are we going to see. So within the same job profile, around 1.6 million people need to shift their job. So they will need to get an on-the-job training in order to be able to do a new job in the future. So, for example, that's the person in the final assembly of an OEM that currently works on assembling and putting together the ICE, and in the future needs to work with high voltage battery assembly. Then we have around 610,000 jobs that need to be that need to really have a retraining and a relocation as well. So that is, for example, that employee that currently works in the gearbox production of ZF and in the future needs to work in the electric motor assembly. This is a different job. We believe this person can do this different job, but really retraining is necessary in order to make that work for this one specific person. And then we will see around 225,000 persons that will really need to work in a completely new job profile, where we have a heavy requalification that is necessary, that will not work on the job anymore. And that is, for example, the person that needs to work in the future in the battery cell production, where you have clean room conditions, where you have high voltage conditions, where you have a completely different setup, where people need to be specifically qualified for in order to be able to do that job. But that having said, you see that those 2.4 million positions out of the 5.7 that I showed as a baseline really need to get specific training in the next decade to be able to master that transition. What does that mean in total, specifically for companies and for politics? Well, for companies, it means from our perspective 4 things. So number 1, companies need to analyze their status quo to really understand what is where are we right now and how are we going to be impacted from those 5 trends and electromobility specifically. And for sure, if you think about all the OEMs and the tier 1 suppliers, they already have a very good view on that. But the automotive industry, those 5.7 million jobs are not only in the big companies. There are a lot of tier 2, tier 3 companies that have maybe 100, 200 or even less jobs, and they don't know yet completely. So here there's still work to do. Companies need to develop their target picture for 2030. So where do they want to play in the future? If, for example, their gearbox production goes away, what else can they do? What else do they want to do in order to remain successful in the next decade? And then they need to think through what is the impact on my employees. So they need to conduct a proper human resource planning in order to enable that change that I just showed on the slide before on a large scale, on a company scale here as well. And lastly, they need to make sure that their employees get the right retraining and upskilling programs to really be able to master that transition. Companies, from our perspective, cannot do all of that alone. Politics need to support the industry in order to make that change happen. Number one is the politics need to ensure that there is enough awareness within sectors and companies that a heavy transition is going to come. And again, I'm not speaking about the OEMs and the tier ones that need to be trained here. I'm talking about the small and medium-sized companies that need to be supported to really understand what's going to happen in the next decade. And then politics should make sure that the right educational curricula are set up in order so that companies can bring their employees into those specific educational curricula. And here, for example, again, I'm talking about high voltage trainings, enough high voltage trainings so that people can be upskilled in this transition. As every company needs to do their own human resource planning, we think that politics, the countries and the European Union as a whole needs to do a strategic workforce planning as well to understand what is really the impact on a regional level. Where do we have too many jobs in the future and or too many people for the jobs we have, and where are we going to have not enough people for the jobs that will grow there to support managing this transition. And lastly, I think very operationally, countries and regions can support in matching supply and demands for job seekers, so that, for example, with an appropriate platform, people that have a certain skill set can understand in which region of the same country or even within Europe this skill set is going to be needed within the next decade. And if companies and politics work in that way, we believe that the trends will all in all make the automotive industry even more competitive in 10 years from now. And with that, I would close my presentation and give back to the moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christian. This is a very good presentation, and I'm really glad that we are not in a bad position, and all this transformation only needs shift from new green industries and need new green competences. And let us see our Polish perspective. Alexander, floor is yours, and just give us this Polish point of view. What do you find in your report? And floor is yours.
Thank you. Gladly. I've seen Christian's presentation before. It's very insightful. So I'm glad once again I got to see it. I'm wondering if I need to do something to share my screen in addition. Yes, it's visible. Okay. Just let me get into full screen mode. Okay, so we as PSPA, first of all, are very grateful for the invitation to the panel discussion. I'm very happy that we can follow this more European scoped study with our own conclusions. Our presentation, of course, in our study, our report, which is available on our site, both in Polish and English, and we're trying to communicate the conclusions of said report as widely as we can, is also based on our cooperation with BCG. What we were focusing more on was not only just the shift of the automotive industry towards new green sectors, but to e-mobility and to zero-emission technologies in particular. Let me just get to the next slide. To understand what this means for Poland, one must see what it means for the entire economy. And this is how we're trying to position this report. First of all, one needs to understand that for Poland, the automotive sector is a very strong part of the entire economic structure, with nearly 90 billion euros in annual turnover as a value. The purely automotive employment, not the widely defined one that we will see in just a number of minutes, reaches up to 350,000 employees. Per what we assessed, and you will see this on the later slides, it's 400,000 as a whole. The automotive sector has a 10% share of the industrial production and nearly 10% in terms of the investment outlays in the whole industrial sector of the Polish economy. So it's a very significant component when looking at not only just the shift in one particular sector, but in the economy as a whole. Now, I'll get to the particular numbers of employees in the sector in just a number of minutes, but the automotive sector is also a huge component of the Polish export value. As you can see here, it exceeds 15% of the annual export value of the entire Polish economy, entire value generated just by one sector. The value of the export of the automotive sector itself is close to 40 billion euros. The number of companies operating on the market is 332 companies, as you can see on the slide. So it's not only a big chunk of the economy, it's also a big chunk of all the entities and enterprises functioning on the Polish market. Now, what we wanted to show with our study is that some of the characteristics of this shift, of this transition, will cause quite, we think, significant job losses. And this is very particular to Poland. It basically pertains to the specificity of the market. But there are solutions for this. One of such solutions is, for example, the battery market. Poland is already a global, we can say, power in terms of the production of lithium-ion cells. This is due to, of course, one company, one leader, and you can see on the top right of the slide, LG Green Solution, which is nearly 4 times as large as the second place Tesla Gigafactory in Nevada. So it's a very important and significant investment. But there are also other entities working and producing batteries and contributing to this export value, which is at 2% of the annual export value of the entire Polish economy. As you can see, we are now very, very high up in rankings, first in the European Union, and we will probably retain this position for the next 5 years. And we're in the top 5 of the global ranking as well. And we will probably remain in that position, just maybe drop 1 spot for the next 5 years. Now, this is important because, as you can see, this is mostly production capacities. We don't yet hold the R&D and innovation resources that we could have. And we need to invest and look at that with much more focus for the future. The second part of our strong suite, I can say, in terms of the automotive market, is the mass transportation. Now, for Poland, we've been a leader in this regard for some years now, and we are now responsible for 46% of the exports of e-buses for the entire European Union. So these 2 slides show the 2 strong points that could support the compensation for the job losses when the automotive sector shifts towards zero emission. Now, going back to what Christian said, and this is very important, the automotive industry is a very, very wide definition as part of the economy. So altogether, and this is a BCG effort, which we find very insightful and good for this study. There are 26 industries altogether, divided into 8 clusters. And what is very important here is to turn your attention to not only the OEMs and the ICE or the internal combustion engine focused suppliers, but also the non-ICE suppliers. And this is a very, very important component, because this is actually the second and the third of these clusters are the most numerous in Poland. And we already know that EV production will actually be taken out of Poland and will be heading back to their original markets. We know that the EV production facilities the vehicle production facilities already in place in Poland will shift to other markets, and hence EV production will not be present in Poland in the future. That is what our predictions show and what we think will occur. So this is a big challenge for the entire automotive sector, because we will need to base this shift in order to compensate on adjacent industries and innovative industries. The adjacent industries, of course, entail equipment and services, and a very important part, which is energy production. Poland, of course, with its exceeding 70% reliance on co-production capacities, has a big challenge ahead of it, also in its energy mix. And this is part of electromobility as well, of course. Another part of the challenge is the energy infrastructure, which entails EV charging infrastructure. This is a component that needs to be steered very dynamically. And as for EVs, for the acquisition process, since July, we have a program in place, a state subsidy incentive to drive this process. We need to start working on one that will address the problem of a still small number of charging stations. At present in Poland, we have below 1,700 charging stations, public charging stations, which is a number that is very low. And we actually think that in the next 5 years it will grow, but the tendency will shift toward private charging stations. All this technology and all this innovation will need to be addressed, and employees will need to fill those voids. For the job categories that are within the automotive sector, I think most of them are quite straightforward and obvious. Of course, engineering, but there are various other areas such as procurement, sales, production and service operations, and other functions. Herein, a very important area, which is the IT and software area, that area of competence that will also need to be pursued and developed. Now, as you can see on this slide, it refers to the total number of jobs in the automotive industry, which nears 400,000. Now, the largest chunk of this are the non-ICE suppliers and the maintenance and repairs employees. This nears on 290,000 employees, which is nearly 3/4 of the entire number. And this also, actually, incidentally, is the area of the employment of the labor market, which will be hit strongest by the transition of the automotive industry towards zero emission vehicles. This is because the ICE production and the vehicle production, while it might be maintained in some part, one has to take into account that an electric vehicle has 1/4, or per some calculations, 1/3 of the parts of a conventional vehicle, which means that even if we reskill many of these workers, there will still not be enough demand for all the products that are being manufactured at this point. So those are some of the challenges, and it's actually the largest number of these employees that will be hit the strongest by this change. That is very important to understand the specificity of the Polish market. Of course, we can see that there will be a very high added value for the battery production, since we're already very strong in this part of the process. We see that there is a lot of demand for software engineers, which is the IT area that I mentioned. But we see also the huge drop in the vehicle production, which will hit the industry very strongly because it will not be held in Poland. In terms of the particular impacts, excuse me, I think the trend noticeable in Europe is also present in Poland, with that difference that our market doesn't have the production capacity for electric vehicles. But as you can see, most of these areas actually record decreasing numbers and not increasing numbers. We do see energy infrastructure being increased, but what Poland needs to strive for is to develop its own R&D and development capacities in order to introduce and strengthen this sector with its own capabilities and not with capabilities that will be coming in from abroad. Now, I went through those numbers very fast, mostly because they are part of the wider study that was carried out within the entire European Union. What we decided to do, once we were seeing that the markets in Western and Northern Europe are so much different than the Polish market, where we are now at a level of 30,000 electric vehicles, with only a half of that being fully electric vehicles, BEVs, and the infrastructure that I said that is not adequate to the size of the economy. And we see that the efforts that are being made on this market are also inadequate for the dynamic that is necessary for it to thrive in. So we started these observations, and we as PSPA issue every year what we call the Polish EV Outlook Report. It's one of the largest and most competent data and information centers for the market to use in order to plan development and strategies. It contains not only the data pertaining to the present situation of the market, but it also contains data for the future and our predictions. Now, we usually base these predictions on a negative, neutral, and positive basis scenarios, where these scenarios entail a kind of accounts of what could be done to make the dynamic better. What we did with the report and the study that we did in cooperation here was to actually make the positive scenario an ambitious scenario. Because as you see on this slide, there are net job impacts. Now, these net job impacts are very important to be fully understood and well interpreted, because they may seem not that bad for a market that concerns 400,000 employees, but what they really show is only the net number. So they show what happens with the compensation factor in place, but they don't show the losses per se. So the number that we saw on the earlier slides, the 255,000 and the 63,000, which means the non-ICE suppliers and the maintenance and repair workers, some of them will be able to be reskilled and retrained and reapplied to other areas, depending if some factors will be implemented, but many of them will not. And taking into account that much of the automotive industry is actually located in the vicinity of the coal mining and coal energy industry, these shifts on the job market will be double as painful as they could have been. So if we take into account the pessimistic scenario, and please also note that these are figures for 2030, where per our calculations, only in 2025, Poland will have close to 300,000 vehicles, electric vehicles, which is a combination of passenger vehicles and delivery vehicles, as those are the most abundant, as per our observation to this point. It will also have close to 100,000 private charging station points and 43,000 public EV charging points. So this is 225. For 2030, the vehicle number will near the mythical 1 million that was promised already to occur earlier for electric vehicles, and nearly 3 million for the charging points. So these numbers will be in place, we hope, and this is a realistic scenario. But per the jobs, at 2030, when we will be in the area that I spelled out for the statistical data for the car park and the charging infrastructure, if nothing is done in terms of public administration strategies, policies that aim to not only identify the areas that need to be addressed, that will be hit hardest, but also provide adequate programs for reskilling and education and academic support, where businesses don't have the adequate employment plans to reskill and shape the flexibility of the employees, and where employees don't have the awareness regarding the oncoming challenge, then we will have a pessimistic scenario, which basically means what is taking place now, if it keeps on happening, we will lose a net number of 17,000 jobs. This means that the aligned industries and the innovation and R&D industries will not be enough to compensate for the loss in the ICE-related manufacturing. Now, if there is an intermediate scenario where more adequate incentive and subsidy policies are introduced, where the administration actually identifies and starts some programs to support this reskilling effort, where businesses actually see the problem in Poland and in the CE region, because what's taking place here, what is very specific for the Polish region, is actually shared by many of the CE, Central Eastern European states. So if just a small effort is made and only some policies are introduced, but still the awareness problem is not addressed as it should be, then we will have a net loss of 5,000 jobs. If we start working now and start turning this, maybe not threat, but risk into an opportunity, and start putting in all the effort on the side of the public administration, on the side of the business and the entities and the stakeholders actually involved in the market, and NGOs and academic institutions that start addressing this awareness issue of the wider public opinion and the employees who are concerned by this process, we may actually not only get a net compensation, but a net growth of 6,000 jobs. And this brings us to the activities that would need to be taken to boost this dynamic and to achieve this ambitious scenario. We're looking forward to achieving this ambitious scenario, although we're seeing that much needs to be done also to motivate the players involved. Now we see, as was said in the introduction, and thank you for this, the Fit for 55 legislation proposal is a very good inspiration, and it is a good path and a good direction per our assessment. if it passes the legislative works of the European Parliament. Hopefully it will. We even strived for it to be more ambitious, and we support such messaging. But as it is adequate enough to start motivating, especially AFIR, motivating companies and the public administration and the whole target group to start taking efforts to actually achieve this ambitious scenario. Now, the public administration, as I said, of course, needs to shape these comprehensive predictions based on advanced models of supply and demand, on seeing how things will move, how the whole automotive sector will change, also in terms of turnover, investment, and many other components. Then this needs to be addressed with a very strong focus on the actual employees, on the employee groups, on the branches of the industry and of the sectors and clusters identified within this study. And creating these new career and employment platforms, these possibilities to retrain and reskill is very important, and companies cannot do this alone without comprehensive support from the public administration, which shifts into the companies and the business side of the automotive sector, which of course, the automotive sector and the companies involved, which I'm sure the experts present today will expound on, are fully aware of this problem, or maybe not problem, but this opportunity, this change, because zero emission transport will happen. The European Commission has signaled this very clearly. The UN, and as we're just coming out of COP26, has also signaled this very clearly. So this is going to take place. And automotive companies are very, very clear on this and are very aware of this. But developing strategic employment plans which reflect this awareness are very crucial for this process. This means also connecting with employees and shaping this kind of mentality that self-development and raising their own competence is a natural part of their every work routine. And this is something that, as a culture, needs to be shaped in from the side of the employer and then onto the employees, who need to adapt this philosophy as something that is a natural process in today's world, because innovation is driving very dynamically and fast. These changes will come along even faster than probably we predict. And so focusing on raising competence and self-development will be part of something that employees will need to understand. But this needs to happen with the effort of the two first groups and the kind of socially public group, which also involves organizations such as PSPA, and which we're trying to strive for and do. I hope that gave a little bit more of an insight to the Polish side of things. Let me get back to the screen. And thank you for the time. And once again, thank you for the conversation. I hope the discussion will be fruitful. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for insightful presentation, as well as Alexander and Christian. I think this is good information that the transition to electromobility does not pose a threat, but rather an upskilling opportunity for workers and for industry. And thanks a lot for those findings and recommendation. And now let's move to the practical point of view and the practical dimension of those skills shift. And let's start the discussion. Thanks a lot once more. And so let's start from Arne. The platform of electromobility represents 45 organizations from the industry, civil society, and the cities. And in September this year, you publish a paper with the key findings and recommendation to the European Green Deal and employment success. From the second point of view, the report you have done with Boston Consulting Group, it's a great job systematizing trends in the fields where skilled transition is needed to create a smooth change to the green automotive. We all know that it is impossible to start transformation in every industry, in every cluster, with the same incentiveness and same engagement and funding and people. Maybe you find some kind of bright European roadmap and a bright idea how to make this transformation just and effective. Or maybe there's not such a idea, and in the automotive industry we need specific national design solutions. Could you share your opinion and findings, or maybe even give you a few examples of good practices for responsible long-term approach to the transition and the training of workers?
Yeah, happy to. And thank you very much for the invitation to take part of this panel today. And thank you, Alexander and Chris, reminding me of what a good report we produced, and also really familiarizing myself with the Polish situation. I hadn't done that yet. But indeed, the platform was very happy to be involved in pulling this report together and feeding into it together with the Boston Consulting Group. I'm an optimistic person by nature, and I think industry is actually ready to get going and actually make sure our transport sector across the board, but let's talk about passenger cars today, is going to be electrified going forward, because that is going to happen. That's just a fact of life. And there's lots of opportunities to be had. And I would say, actually, from my vantage point, and I also have a day job, I work on for a major charge point operator in the Netherlands, but active in 12 European countries in Europe, is that we would love to see more tier 1, tier 2 suppliers get involved in this sector, especially on the production of hardware, good charging hardware, and making sure it interfaces nice vehicles. Because make no mistake, the energy system and the transport system are coming together via digital, and the digital component is important too, and there's lots of work and skills needed in that domain as well. But the synergies of those two systems together are actually mind-boggling. There's lots of different opportunities to be had, whether it's on the services side in terms of the relationship with your end customer, but it represents a huge value pool. So a Western European household, let's also talk about a European household, consume energy, electricity mostly in our homes. If you have an EV parked outside on your driveway, it's been thoroughly researched that if you're able to charge at an opportune moment, you can save tremendous amounts of money on a yearly basis. On average, this calculation is quite old already, but the IEA, the International Energy Agency, in a report estimated that value to be around 600 euros per year per household of energy savings you could be optimizing if you charge your EV on your driveway at an opportune moment, off peak, on peak. That's a huge value pool. Let's not forget that either. And to turn around the question, well, first of all, we cannot afford not to do this, right? So I think Europe is actually leading the charge, very much so, in terms of efficient vehicle regulations that have been part of the European drive to make cars and trucks more efficient through time. There's more electric plug-in hybrid vehicles registered on the European market today than anywhere else. And the added benefit is that European infrastructure, the electricity infrastructure, is in pretty good shape. So if we're making the grid and the energy system smart by rolling out smart and connected charging hardware, the opportunities there are boundless. And what's also really, really interesting, I think, is that as more EVs come into the vehicle fleet, you also have mobile batteries around. That means you can harness energy in them, but you also make the energy system as such more agile. We used to come out of an energy world where you had an electricity producer, transmission system operator, local grid company, and then the consumers. A very linear system. Right now, with more EVs coming online, also with those with the functionality to put power back into your home, or perhaps sell the electricity off to your neighbor at a local level, makes the whole system more agile. And that is also not a bad thing to do with more dramatic weather in Europe that we might be expecting going forward. But it's Europe's opportunity to become energy independent. A very topical discussion, perhaps, but it is. We can generate electricity, we can harness electricity, we can consume electricity or feed it back. But basically, I think there are a lot of good reasons to want to be doing this. Let me leave it there and see what other questions you might have.
Okay, so now let's move to the Polish perspective. Paweł Widał, as a president of the Union of Employers, you have participated in a discussion on European Forum of New Ideas about the future of the automotive industry and how Polish companies and experts see the role of electromobility as a flywheel or of green transformation. Are you such optimistic as Arne, or maybe your findings on this panel are rather different and show other different perspective for the electromobility and this transition to the new greener one. Please just turn on the microphone.
It helps.
Yes, it will.
Normally. So Jakub, thank you very much for inviting me to this panel and for the question. Hello everybody, and thank you very much BCG and PSPA for presentation on the European and Polish level on the consequences of transformation and energy transformation in mobility from internal combustion engine to battery electric vehicle. Indeed, I had the chance to moderate, or rather co-moderate, a panel on EFNI in Sopot, in which we were debating with the representatives of the private energy sector in Poland on the topic which we called briefly energy for mobility. And conclusion out of this panel was from the automotive sector that there is no way back from transformation towards low, later zero emission mobility. It's expected by the societies. We see on the global level that around 65% of people, they are expecting mobility to be clean, and that's becoming one of key priorities for them, and also what is important, a reason for purchase. That's the expectation from the regulator. We see Fit for 55 proposal from the European Commission, which is actually asking automotive industry in Europe to decrease CO2 emission from passenger vehicles by 55% in 2030 and by 100% by 2035. And I think it's also understood by the industry that we cannot be a problem. We have to be a part of the solution. And apart from being a chairman of the association, I'm working for company Stellantis, which has been created by a merge of FCA and PSA, two large automotive groups. So from this perspective part of the company, I wanted to tell you that the strategy is simple. We go towards electromobility. We expect that by 2030, 70% of our registration, cars we are selling to our customers, they will be electrified. We have programs to build batteries, both in Europe and in the US. We have company established to be a part of the charging infrastructure, and we are working on other mobility solutions, appreciating megatrends, including zero emission, autonomous vehicles, connectivity, and shared mobility. So we see clearly the shift from current business model to the future business model, where mobility would be a service, mobility as a service. So when you are putting together all those social expectations, regulatory demand, and commitment from the industry, it's becoming obvious that there is no way back, as I told you before. And now let's go from this global into the Polish perspective. Automotive industry is a key industry for the Polish economy. It's the second largest. It will not escape from the global megatrends and European trends, and that's because we are fully within the value chain of Europe and global value chain. Even more, some 95% of automotive companies in Poland, large companies in Poland, they are not of the Polish capital, so they were foreign direct investments to Poland. So there is no chance that Poland would be separated from European trends. And in this context, we have to be ready on the local level for the transformation. And the current trend is turning from internal combustion engine into electromobility. So we have seen the presentations which were showing a couple of scenarios, and I think that it's not too late to try to optimize the situation, find solution to make sure that we are not losing the jobs. The truth is that around 1/3 of the value chain is connected to the internal engine, which means there is no internal engine. We are losing 1/3 of the value chain, including know-how, including technologies in which Europe is probably the best globally, and losing jobs. They will be compensated by the electromobility components, whether it's battery, electric engine, some other components. But of course, we have to look at the challenge related to this transformation from quantitative perspective, which I think that scenarios were quite optimistic. So even in the most pessimistic scenario, we wouldn't lose a lot of jobs. Second is quality of the jobs. And here I think that we would be confronted with two trends. As mentioned by our presenters earlier, production of electric vehicle, production of battery, and production of electric motor is not as complex and complicated as production of internal combustion engine. Ergo, we might be observing less demand for highly qualified professionals. So that's first area we have to address. However, on the other side, and that's the second aspect, we cannot forget about the convergence of the mobility with digital revolution. And I think that digital, that would be a really change maker in terms of a set of qualifications that would be needed by the automotive industry. First, to produce cars, but second, to offer mobility as a service. We can clearly see an upcoming revolution in the model business when we go out of producing the car, selling the car through the dealer, servicing the car, and then pushing the car towards the end of life. Mobility as a service would create completely new opportunities, and I think that would be, together with electromobility, a true revolution, which would be completely changing the picture. So, summing this up, I think that automotive industry understood the challenges. I think that we are working very hard to provide solutions. We see some challenges and risk associated to the transformation towards zero emission. And I think that it would be very reasonable if we work hard towards the objective. However, in 2028, we should look at the situation from the infrastructure perspective, from the demand perspective, social expectations, to work on acceptable solution for 2030, 2035, and later. It may happen that not in all areas battery electric vehicle could be a perfect solution. Probably heavy transport long distances would be still a challenge. And especially in Poland, where, as a conclusion of our panel in Sopot, we are heavily depending on coal. We have a lot of challenges in terms of grid. and actually we need a very fast solutions proposed by actually regulator in Poland to make sure that we go fast towards renewable energy sources, and we modernize our grid as fast as possible to make sure that we are avoiding blackout in 2030. Thank you very much.
Well, just for this insightful analysis of automotive industry in Poland, and I think it's not so optimistic, and rather it's interesting time, not saying a hard time before the Polish industry. Hope to find a way also on this today discussion how to make it happen to remember about the workers and how to make them not losing job or just stay employed, and now move just forward to this educational dimension of our discussion. Wojciech, as an expert on qualification system, I know that you have been working on a report that summarizes employees' initiatives in the field of cooperating in vocational training, upskilling, reskilling workers in Europe. Could you share us your key findings and maybe recommendation? Are companies and employees organization prepared to upcoming changes, and maybe they need any support from the national or maybe even European authorities? Because we all need to remember that every industry there are people, and how to make them not losing jobs and prepare for the new future, new green future, because we know that there is no escape from this direction. And what do you find? What do you think? And how we should prepare, and with the recommendation to companies and employees organization?
Yes, that's a very difficult question to answer. So, is anyone prepared for the upcoming changes? Well, I certainly doubt that it's even possible to be really prepared for this, but surely we see that bigger players are better prepared because they have the resources, the foresight, and so on. But maybe starting from a different angle. What we found is, of course, what has already been stated. The jobs are changing, their contents, I mean, but also the structure of the labor market. So, companies innovate, they default, new types of jobs emerge all the time. So we see that these changes are accelerating, and the trend is set to be there in the future. And from that, the lifelong learning and all the other already mentioned in the reports and in some of the presentations, the issues that they remain in force. What we found is that you could actually say there is a new policy space emerging, the skills policies. I mean, especially from the Polish perspective, but I think this is a bigger change. We move from talking just about educational policies to talking about skills, and the relevant organizations, I mean, such as OECD, EU, or UNESCO, they all speak about skills development, skills policies. Sectoral organizations do it too. We see that they give more or less the same message. They find the same points, and all these in this space. The key narrative seems to be that we need coordination of actors in the education, the labor market. Perhaps the blueprint initiatives is the most prominent example. So we try somehow collectively to deal with the challenge that we have ahead of us. In case of automotive sector, we have a good, quite visible history of this kind of cooperation. The Gear 2030 report, the Drives project now, also the ALBATS and the Automotive Sectoral Alliance. There is some number of these kind of initiatives, and they are supported in various ways, either by organizations in the sector, by the Commission, the European Commission, I mean, or by national authorities also. But in every national context, they work differently. So we have this different setting of the industrial, partners, and how they cooperate, what position they take. For example, if they have collective agreements and so on. So in every case, in every country in Europe, I think as well, these coordination structures, which are needed to make responsible, long-term, dedicated strategies and realize them, these coordination structures, they are emerging, and they do not have a clear role as a sort of a designated formal competence. When we were looking at how they operate, what they do, what they are, I couldn't shake off the feeling that it's rather a definitive trait than a temporary state. So perhaps this is the way we are going to cooperate, coordinate collectively, that we'll have networks of organizations and partners, which we are not sure what exactly is the role they're playing in the game. Maybe it's just that we didn't get deep into the topic, but it's getting really complicated. So to sum up this point, it seems that we are in a very complicated situation. To be where we are here, to coordinate the education with the production, employment, and so on, we already need to really try very hard to coordinate, and we need to do more. So it seems to be even more difficult. And in my opinion, the question is, of course, this should be supported by the authorities. Of course, we need long-term, consistent, wisely funded, and well-staffed policy initiatives. But also, this is just one part of the puzzle. So we need to say, I think, that's my opinion. We need to say it clearly, and I think most of the partners already see that and agree to that. That it's also the core responsibility of any business, the ownership of their future, the future of their employees, of they own their own. So they need to play a much bigger role in the cooperation on education. It seems to be rather challenging, and there are many underlying questions that come besides. I will not go into these philosophical considerations, but just to make a shortest view of what I mean is, who is responsible for training the youth, who will in the future work in companies, and of this work the companies will also be able to gain. Is it the state sole responsibility? Is it the parents and the youth themselves? Are they the responsible ones? To what extent should the companies be responsible? And so I have the feeling, and it gets verified in numerous occasions, that we get different answers to these questions from different actors, and I'm afraid unless we get back to this core question and really try to speak about how the situation looks like, who who can be responsible for what, we will have really difficult times in getting the things done. So I'm not really for or against making any of this the sole responsibility of one partner, but what I'm saying is, I think we operate on false assumptions. I mean, everyone thinks the systems are working in some way, and they're not really working in any of the ways that people say they do. And hence we have many problems in cooperation and coordination when it comes to cooperation of employers and education organizations. that's just the social landscape. So if I may, I have only one more thing to say, is that of course this coordination of what we teach, what we learn, what we need for the future development is also a difficult question in terms of saying out loud what we need. So, if you want a skill, say what skill you need. Yeah, seems simple, but it's not. It's really not simple. We are not really able to communicate well and to say what exactly skills we need, because they are context dependent, they're individual. We describe them in words. The words have different meanings for different partners and so on. So it really gets very complicated. And of course, it's utopia to chase this this rabbit and imagine that we might be able to exactly pin every skill and say what we need, forecast a few years in the future and say that's exactly what we're going to need. But this is another thing. But we have already ways of doing this. So what some of the projects, Drives projects, for example, have been doing is defining the qualifications or the job roles, defining what skills are inside, describing what knowledge is needed, what types of tasks are related, what types of technology do people need, and making this the actual reference point for communication between the actors. And so this reference point is what we actually call very often qualifications. So we say we have let's say a packet of skills that is well described, that we know what constitutes them. We have a pretty good agreement on that they're really needed, that they will be used in different contexts, in different companies, I mean. And this is something that we should really support the development of, so that for the companies, they can signal in a way what they need, what exactly is inside. And on the other hand, for the education to get a sort of clear indication what the partners require. That doesn't solve the problem, of course, but I think this is one of the of the solutions that we are seeing, and we're not using it enough. And sadly, it's very time consuming. It's very difficult to do this. And it requires not just specific technical, methodical skills, it requires a whole range of coordination actions that we are, in some cases, maybe in some industries or parts of industries, or perhaps in smaller companies especially, we are not really prepared to do. So we don't have a well-developed human resources, human development, parts of the companies, especially in small and medium companies. They're as data shows, they're actually non-existent in Poland, for example, in most cases. So this is really difficult. I don't want to sound too gloomy, but we are making very small steps, and as it seems, we would need to make huge leaps forward. So for that use, and here I'm going to stop. Sorry for taking so much of the time, but for that use, we really need a very well-focused, well-staffed, and last but not least, also well-funded policies with key partners on board to make this happen. Some of these requirements, I think we've already have them met. We see partners, for example, being on board with such actions, but a long way is surely ahead of us. Sorry again for taking so long. You gave me a very difficult question, so I really tried my best.
Thanks a lot, but I just want to mention that we are slowly coming to the end of this interesting and fruitful debate. But as a Polish, we like to complain, and I'm really glad to have Arne on the board. Can you give us maybe optimistic view and examples how we should manage all those problems? And we are talking about very wide of things that should be done. Can you share us examples? And also, please, Paweł, think about all those examples that maybe good practices from other countries we can implement, because I need to sum this discussion with the optimistic point of view. I'm just an optimistic person, and I will glad to make this discussion sounds good for also for other people. So, floor is yours, and give us a chance to be more optimistic in the future.
Well, let me try. And maybe let's circle back to the Boston Consulting Group report, actually sort of at a macro level, at a European level, that we have 2.4 million jobs that we need to do something with, right? That dissipate, and we need those hands, we need those people, we need those skills to actually make sure that electromobility across the board becomes a success, because there's a lot of work to do. And I think 2.2 million jobs that I was reminded of actually require on-the-job sort of training. And that's what a lot of European companies are very good at. Now, of course, the big multinationals know very well how to do that. But it also sinks in nicely in something that we as human beings are extremely good at. We learn best from others, right? In a direct sense. Something we need people that have technical skills, who can install, who can basically make sure infrastructure gets rolled out and is properly hooked up to the grid, but also to the digital infrastructure, and make sure that the communication flows smoothly. On-the-job training is extremely important. There's a lot of skilling going on at the moment because there's a lot of work to do. So infrastructure follows vehicles. Let me be very clear there. But also require an insight from public administration about what it means to make and where the challenges lie in your particular area of jurisdiction, or what you need to do. So I think if there's one call to the Polish administration, perhaps that's already being done, but making sure you have a good network of chambers of commerce that can assist SMEs in terms of want to venture out in this space, and what needs to be done and what kind of market intelligence can be had. If you look at your educational systems, these get benchmarked internationally against each other in Europe, and that's a good thing. We can learn from each other. Why are the Baltic countries so strong on digital? Why is that? Is it really necessary to learn 2 or 3 other European languages? Why not just teach one foreign language and go for digital language skills in many schools in Europe, right? Because these are definitely future and soundproof things to do through time. I mean, some of this might be extremely obvious, but ultimately, big unionized, centralized car manufacturing plants as we know them today probably going to not be around. Let's also be clear about this. Perhaps you can disagree with me, but the barriers of entry into the automotive business are falling down rapidly. And so basically, we're living in an age now that for the first time ever, the best sold car in the month of September was an EV, and it was of a foreign make. And they haven't even opened their production plant yet, where they're going to be building a lot more for the European continent, practically on the Polish border. Making sure battery cell manufacturing to Poland would be a crucial thing to do, but also being aware that you need to assist SMEs that are going to be rolling out all this charging infrastructure and all of the different services that come on the back of that, including the charging hardware. I think there are huge opportunities there. So I think you have the big Polish player, Energetyka, who is doing extremely well in that space for heavy-duty vehicle charging, which is going to be a huge market. So basically, in a country where you've had year-on-year economic growth, I would expect a little bit more optimism. But basically, you shake you awake. There's lots of opportunities to be had. The cake is large. There are a lot of pieces of the pie to be eaten. I would just say, apply some focus, do your homework, make sure you know exactly where the gaps are and try to fill them. But this is a dynamic market. And if you're going to sit still, you know you're going to get eaten.
Thanks a lot, because maybe this is our Polish way to success. We complain and we all the time need to find the way to do it better. Maybe this is our idea. But moving to the topic, Paweł, could you maybe tell us about good practices from other countries, because we know that Polish economy facing rising cost of workers, resources, and energy, and this is huge challenge for Polish companies. And maybe because of the changing from the low cost economy to the higher wages and higher costs, maybe we need national support to encourage companies to invest in education, because Polish companies need to spend more money on the resources, costs of energy, and so on. But next cost from to invest in workforce is a challenge. Next challenge. Could you give us examples? And what should be done?
Thank you very much, Jakub, for this question. Actually, regarding the best examples or best practices from abroad, being a chairman of the association, which is having such members like Volkswagen, Stellantis, Robert Bosch, BASF, Pilkington, and others, it's offering a very good examples of educational models from abroad. And I would like to underline the German model, which is strict cooperation between business and schools. I'm very proud that members of the association are so active in this area in Poland. Actually, companies like Volkswagen, like Stellantis, Bosch, they are leaders in Poland, and they have established very good relations with educational system on all levels. And I'm very proud of this, because this is really best practice for others. One small comment in this respect. This system where company is cooperating with school, offering support, offering time of its employees, coaching youngsters, it's not supported by the government at all. In theory, there is a possibility to use the grants coming from so-called de minimis offer. However, big companies, they would never go for it because of their scale. They wouldn't be in position to keep the threshold of 3,000 euro per 3 years. So indeed, both Volkswagen and Stellantis, we dropped even asking for any public aid. And sometimes we think that it could be reasonable if this is somehow supported. Partially cover the costs which are arising on employers' side to make sure that we have the best education system. And I would agree with Mr. Steinhui, who said that big companies probably would do better. We see that those models of Volkswagen, of Opel, Fiat under Stellantis brand right now, it works fine, and we are sharing our experiences in this respect with others using the channel of communication called the Council for Competence in the Automotive sector. Other example of educational system from abroad that I would consider for Poland would be a Finnish model. Finnish model is extremely flexible, and I like the way they approach. I talked to the Deputy Minister of Education of Finland, and he told me that the system is coming from the simple fact that Finland is not as big and as rich country as Germany. So they have to be very practical. In short, they are assessing the set of competences and skills of the student, and they are offering training which is covering those areas where they discovered that this student and person to be trained is missing specific skills, specific competences. So very, 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 very practical one. So recommendations for Poland to be optimistic. Support of business academia or business education cooperation. Second, in Polish circumstances, I think that we should come up with the good ideas to involve teachers into the educational system connected with business. Invest in teachers and make sure that they know technologies we are using as big companies. And finally, I would say that looking at the age of our employees, some of them are getting close to the pension age. I think that we could use their knowledge and experience to share this with students, with pupils, and create a kind of team of experienced older employees to support educational system both in schools and then in our plants. And the second part of the truth is that we have a lot of small and medium enterprises which are maybe not yet realizing the challenges connected with the transformation. And here I see, as mentioned before, a big role of administration, a big role of associations, confederations of employers to make sure that they understand this. And probably small, medium enterprises would need more support to make sure that they are going through the transformation, including, for example, a need for decarbonization. Just last remark, if you look at the Polish energy mix with heavy carbon weight, and knowing that European value chain should be emission neutral quite soon, there is a question how to support small, medium enterprises in realizing that with the heavy carbon footprint, they might be out of the value chain. And here look at the need of competences to make sure that they go through the carbonization processes smoothly. It's completely brand new of skills needed. And here I think government should come with the complex program to support enterprises with decarbonization, meaning one side improving energy efficiency to make sure that we are emitting less CO2. On the other side, supporting renewable energy sources to be located at the plants. I don't know, solar, photovoltaics, wind, those kinds of solutions. So a lot of challenges. Countries are different, even within European Union. We have to make sure that we are not getting to the Europe of two speeds. And I think that Poland, with energy mix and with the playing important part in the value chain of the automotive industry, might have more challenges, and here cooperation between business and administration is even more required to understand local specifics. But at the end, Polish automotive industry has been very resilient to all crises. I think that the last one could be even at the benefit for the Polish automotive industry, looking at the tendency to shorten value chain. So I'm very optimistic that this industry, supported by great people, will be flourishing in the future after all kinds of transformations and revolutions.
Thanks a lot for this optimistic point of view. And just Wojtek, briefly to sum up your thesis that why lack of defined qualification in the wide range of electromobility jobs are so crucial for education and universities and for schools. And just briefly, what should be done to make it happen? Just cooperation on the field of qualification between companies and universities and maybe vocational schools.
Yes. I will say about that. I just wanted to agree with Paweł Wido that yes, a lot of things are happening. We have the sectoral council, we have some changes in the VAT laws in Poland. So I think we are moving in the right direction. We also have the new qualifications emerging. So slowly moving on to your question, Jakub. Well, what is the point of it, or how should this be? How could this be our solution? Maybe an example would be the best thing to give. So, of course, we know electric vehicles, are reality. They drive around, and it seems that we have difficulties in maintaining and repairing of their engines, for example. So, people who dealt with engines insofar they have a completely different set of competences, or at least significantly different. And as it turned out in the works of the Sectoral Council for Competences in Automotive and including electromobility sector, a thought emerged that we need a specific qualification for that, one of many, but for this set of tasks. And this qualification can be, let's say, medium-sized qualifications, which could be used by either students in vocational schools. That would be an additional one for them, so that when they get on the labor market, they can actually get into this part of the growing part of the pie, and work with electric vehicles. On the other hand, of course, the qualification could also be achieved, could be attained by workers already on the market who want to specialize in some different than mechanical repairs and so on. So what is it, this sort of qualification? It's description of what a person needs to know, what the person needs to be able to do, with requirements that can be translated to the language that is closer to educational institutions. So a description that tries to show exactly not just what the person we want to do, but what we want to maintain, we want to repair this or that sort of engine or other appliance. We want to say exactly, what kind of theory you need to know, what kind of maybe activities or something less than a big task you need to be able to do, what kind of tools you need to use, how you plan your work with this sort of, in this line of work, and so on. So we have all this sort of descriptions, and additionally we also have in these qualifications, we also have the descriptions which we say are criteria for verification or for assessments. In some other languages would be perhaps more appropriate. So not only there is the instruction for the education institutions on what exactly is important for the sector, for the industry, but also there is this detailed instruction on exactly what to look at at the assessment level, so that the learners are more, so we can be more clear about what we actually meant on one hand, and that they actually can do these things. And as a result, we have actually a language of communication. And so as we communicate and say we need this skill, we learn to describe it in more detail. And as we want to say it shortly, so we want to compress this information, and we don't want to have 10 pages long descriptions of job offers that say what we want you to know and be able to do. We just want to have one piece there. You have this qualification. You can get this, you can get certified. Of course, you will probably not come to the work and be able from day one to do everything, but you will have a very good basis, and in it, 3, 4, 5, I don't know, depending on the job, in some time, sometimes longer, of course, you will be able to quickly integrate into the organization, into the workplace, and be able to start working as a well-prepared worker. And And to do that, of course, as I said, well, a lot is needed. So it's not just taking 2-3 experts and taking their opinion. It needs to be somehow taken into account that the educational perspective might be different, and the better such qualification is prepared, the more successful it can be. Finally, money is needed for that. So it's not just preparing the standard. This qualification need to be financed in a way. So someone has to pay for the training, someone has to pay for the assessment. And the question is, what model should be? In every case, it could be a different answer, of course. What model for such a qualification should be, taken? Public funding, mixed funding, and so on. So I will not get into this, but this might be the most important. So we can have a very good standard. We have some of them, and not all of them are used up to their potential, because it's not clear who exactly should be funding and benefiting from this.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much for this valuable contribution. And to sum up, I think to answer the question, are we doing it right? I think yes, we do, but we have a lot of to do. And I'm really glad that we do what we. Okay, yes, Pavel, just please briefly give
If we could sum up this conversation, meeting, presentations, webinar with a call for action for Poland specific. Do you know that a student of vocational school level 1, age 16, 17 years old, cannot be allowed to work on the battery electric vehicle in Poland, even if employer wants to support this student with practical knowledge? And that's because this person cannot get at this age certification of the Polish Electrician Society, which is allowing this person to enter a zone with high voltage. And this examination offering certification could be done only by a person of age 18 and more. So we are asking Polish government, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Labor, to change this. I'm hearing that they are working, the guys from administration are working on the change of this regulation, but maybe we could make this very practical. Let's try to change this small thing to make sure that students of vocational schools could participate in practical training in the plant dealing with battery electric vehicle. Thank you.
Good point.
Hey, thanks a lot. But to sum up, I think we do in good direction, but a lot of things to do. And I'm really glad that what Arne said, that we need to cooperate, share knowledge, share good practices, and because we are on the common market, common labor market, common economy, and if we do not cooperate, we'll spend a lot of money doing exactly the same things, and we should stop that and just cooperate. I hope that will sum up this discussion. And gentlemen, so thank you very much for your contribution once more. It's been a great pleasure to talk with you, and I hope we'll meet again. I just want to remind you that at November 25th, we have a global e-mobility forum. And thanks one more for to speak with you, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It was